Okay. Exactly, yes, that's... Uh-oh. Yeah, they've got...
All right. All right, welcome to the fall session 2017 of OLLI. Of course, this is Dr. Kicklighter's famous class. First question I have for everybody here, we're going to go in a little bit different sequence than I normally would. Do we have any new members to OLLI here? All right, we got one. All right, good for you. All right. All right, number two question. Well, first let me just say to you that if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me or to anybody, because OLLI is really more about fun and education than, being really serious, and you'll find that out very shortly.
Did we find the clicker?
The other piece is, do we have anybody that's new to this class? Ah, okay, we got some new members to the class. All right, well, the good news for you is I am not going to do a singing introduction today, so you'll be all right.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you didn't find your name tag up there, please continue to look for that at your next class. Please make sure that you sign in, because in case of disaster, we like to know if everybody survived. If not, we will look for you. If you haven't filled out an emergency card, please do so, and you can put it behind your name tag, which I have not done that. Turn off your cell phones, except for one person. You may leave yours on. And I guess, like I said, sign in, everything, and I'll clean up the classroom, yada, yada. So anyway, Wisdom Wednesday is now the replacement for Brown Bag, because you may not eat in here. So consequently, you can't have a brown bag because you can't eat. Okay, so now it's Wisdom Wednesday, and it will feature Sue, and Sue will be doing Sue Mason, excuse me, will be doing Alabama's Earliest Inhabitants Camp Life, and that will be tomorrow, actually. And then, of course, the one and only famous trivia time will be Monday, October 2nd, and that will be at the Fellowship Hall at the Auburn Church of Christ. I did write one of the series of questions for that, so it will not be a history question, just so you know. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. Again, that will be on Monday from 11:45 to 12:40 at the Church of Christ. And then there's the Back to School Social. All OLLI members are invited to the annual Fall Social on Wednesday, October 5th. That's from 4 to 6, and that's at the Springs of Mill Lake Clubhouse. And the proper address is 2901 Birmingham Highway, Opelika. Also, briefly, and kind of on a sad note, Dave Herbert has passed away on September 21st. He was 99 years old, so that's sad. And we hear that Helen Brown is recovering, and that is good news. So I guess that pretty much covers it, except, and now, I give you a man that makes navigating the labyrinth of history so easy that even the Minotaur could find his way out. And that's no bull. The only Dr. Joseph Kicklighter.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank, for that warm introduction. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you all. Welcome to this session of what I hope will be a wonderful year-long adventure in classical history. It takes me 3 terms to get through all of this, of what I think is very interesting material dealing with the birth, as I say, of the West. As many of you know, I hail from the Middle Ages, so this is not really my time, but this is all the basis for the medieval period, and I think most people who have any interest in history at all find the classical period interesting. I know I did when I first picked up Edith Hamilton's mythology. And I tried to get the original book, or as close as I could get to it, here, 50 cents. Remember those days? Those were great times, right? And it had to be Edith Hamilton, because for a 9-year-old, it had the writing, that one could manage at that age, and it had all the gods and goddesses, heroes and heroines that made such great interest and made such an impression on a child. And it led me into, frankly, the study of history. So, innocently, from the perspective of a child, the study of gods and goddesses, not just any gods and goddesses, but the Greek ones. And they will come up as part of our story, but only a small part, I'm afraid, because the real people and the issues that concern them will be our principal subjects. Such as, for example, the Trojan War, and how this alleged war, because I'm not convinced it happened, so how that will affect matters, and it will be critically important, as we will see. Of course, Sparta, as in Spartan, and laconic, and all of the other words we get from the famous stories and influences of this remarkable city-state. Obviously, Athens, clearly being, again, supposedly, the founder of democracy, and we will talk about that. Philosophy and Socrates and wars, the birth of history as a field, drama and theater, as in the university production of Antigone going on right now, in case you all are looking for something. It's excellent, and the director is superb, if you all know Deidre. The idea is that over and over again we see the influence of the Greeks. There is no area, I think other than religion perhaps, that they have not profoundly influenced the development of the West. So it might seem odd as we begin that I'm really turning to prehistory and the time of the first civilization in the West. That is, the first civilization in the West. That is, in fact, pre-Greek. The so-called Minoans didn't know they were Minoans, but that often happens in history. I know, it's very ironic, isn't it, that we do call them that, because I guess we have to call them something. And so, from mythology comes the term Minoans. And if you haven't gone to the island of Crete, I definitely think that would be a very nice trip to make. About the size of Puerto Rico, the island of Crete in the Mediterranean had played a rather interesting role in the history of classical Greece and in the future history as being an island where ruled by Turks for a long time. There were individuals kept there, as prisoners after naval conflicts, whatever it might be. But no one understood its significance, They thought it was simply a kind of outpost of the classical Greek world. I thought this was an interesting map so we could see Crete in the context of the rest of the ancient world. Crete, the Minoans go back to maybe, say the 14th century before Christ. You say, whoa, that's a long time. It is, but then look at some of these other folks. If you want to go world history, look, we're sort of Johnny-come-lately on Crete. Isn't that hard to imagine? But look at these other civilizations that go back. Look in the Middle East there when you see what is modern-day Iraq, Palestine, Jordan, and go down to Egypt. All of those are existent, these civilizations, before even these people of Crete were around. But if you're talking west, and we are, then the civilization on the island of Crete has the honor of being the first civilization, so they tell us, in the Western world. And that is what I'd like for you to recall in this particular context of the various places. You say, what about the Greeks? Well, they're coming. But they're not here yet, and as I say, they're even later. They are even later. This is the first civilization, and we always think, but aren't they Greek? Well, that's the big question. Are they Greeks? And the answer is probably not. Now here it is a bit closer up. You've been to Knossos. Those of you who visited Crete will know the city of Knossos. This, of course, is an ancient map, so it doesn't show a lot of the places in the modern world, but at least you get a sense of where we are when we are talking about this particular island. It is sufficiently far from the mainland of Greece that you could imagine they're trading with, well, what we would call today modern-day Syria, Egypt, and all of Turkey, various other places that are so well known to us in our world today. But what did Homer in his epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Bibles of the Greek, what did they have to say about the island of Crete? Not a lot. In the epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were written in the 8th century, very modern, they're describing Crete as just part of the gang. I mean, they were part of the allies that went to Troy to beat up on them. But nothing special. In other words, they were part of the Greek world. So, that is what they were thought of. So, maybe I should suggest here that as far as ancient writers like Homer were concerned, it's all Greek. It's just, Pan-Hellenic, as it were. No question. In other words, that was not a debate. And then came modern archaeology. Have you ever thought about how young archaeology is? History's old. We've been around a long time. But archaeology's like a young relative. I'd call it a creation of, say, the 18th century. They were beginning, you got to have a lot of scientific changes for archaeology. One of the first great archaeological experiments I ever heard about, oddly enough, was going on during the French Revolution. I'm just taking a little break here to remind you of the history of archaeology. You remember the Pope at the time of the French Revolution may have just left your mind at that moment. Pope Pius VI. That's why I'm here. I'm here to remind you. I know you were wondering. Hey, trivia. And Pope Pius VI, the French Catholic Church is just in a big old jam. So he's got a lot of problems. But you know what he did for relief? He went on archaeological digs. He sure did. Pompeii. Yeah, I bet a lot of you all have been there. The ruins there at Pompeii. And that was one of the first great archaeological projects. And you can figure now, since I mentioned French Revolution, hint, hint, you can just imagine the time period that we're talking about, late 18th century, when archaeology is getting hip. And, sort of hip. And the in crowd, they're saying, oh, I went on a dig. What about you? That kind of thing. So I can just imagine how people are beginning to get excited about this and to find these extraordinary discoveries. And this really ties in to our story of Crete. Because, in fact, thanks to archaeology and the eternal fascination with the Iliad and the Odyssey and the story of the Trojan War, which I think infects most children, it certainly did me, the fascination with all of it, as we'll see, meant that Crete would be subjected to much greater examination. And, of course, the fascination with it. This is by no means meant to be a tourist brochure, but to note to those of you who may have been there and bring back wonderful memories. Because I think even today, and if any know differently, you are certainly welcome to correct me, it's still more about tourists than anything else. In other words, I think that's where most of the money comes. The t-shirts and the postcards and all the rest of it. The gift shop. And I got a beautiful mug there when my sister-in-law was there. Got lots of a beautiful color illustrated guidebook to Crete. No telling how much cash she laid down there in Crete. And so went right there into the Greek treasury, the revenue department. So that's very nice for those who are interested. And it is a beautiful place. And it did have a history of its own, but nothing indicating a discovery that we're going to get in the 19th century. And that has much to do with this man, whom I admire so much, one of my heroes, Sir Arthur Evans, knighted, in 1911 it was, for archaeological discoveries of the most profound sort. If you've been to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford University, you'll see his name everywhere. Sir Arthur Evans was a professional archivist and historian and archaeologist. He was married to the daughter of the greatest historian of the Norman Conquest. If you got a long, long weekend with nothing to do, E.A. Freeman's 6-volume history of the Norman Conquest should take care of you. And if you ever had to use Sominex, you'll never need any more. E.A. Freeman, everything you ever wanted to know about the Norman Conquest but were afraid to ask. He was brilliant. And like most people who do medieval, you just say the word Sicily and you just get titillated. It's just, we're so much into Sicily and their connection to the Middle Ages and the Normans and all the rest. But as far as Sir Arthur was concerned, his father-in-law, I'm sure, was a very influential figure. His sister, Edith Evans, for those of you who might know her from her works in medieval art. In other words, he comes from a very intellectual tradition, shall we say. And he spent his life in these kinds of projects and activities. My gosh, he was knighted by the king, so he obviously was not a regular person, so to speak. You will notice him there in his white suit, and you might think he was going to some sort of social occasion. But you know that this is what these archaeologists, explorers did, even though for the purposes of our modern bodies, who have been ruined by air conditioning, we couldn't take it. But in the day, they thought nothing about being dressed like this as he sat in the ruins of Crete. Yes, he decided that there was something more to Crete than met the Greek eye. In other words, he had the time, he had the expertise, and most importantly, he had the money. This is not an activity for those who are impoverished. I must point that out. And if you go to the government in the late 19th century, went to Victoria's government and said, I'd like a few million pounds to traipse off to Crete and do digs, I don't know if Victoria would be too interested in supporting you. So he had the money, shall we say private funds, because it would have to be paid over to not only the government, and the Turks still ruled over Crete at this time, even though Greece had become independent by this day. And with all that money to pay off Turkish bureaucrats, as well as the Turkish government, if you get my drift, there are lots and lots of corruption going on there. He was allowed to dig in Crete. He had an idea about what he was looking for. You know, it's kind of nice when you're an archaeologist, I guess, and you're just waiting to be confirmed in your suspicions. Because his suspicions were that all this time, hidden away, were signs of this great civilized world on the island of Crete. And that is how, through great work in the late 19th century, he would discover it and be, in a sense, the father of what he came to call, and he used the term, Minoans. Why? Because of the legendary King Minos. King Minos, some will recall, was known as the great judge. You remember in Dante's Inferno, King Minos is the one who said who was going to hell and who wasn't. And from his name comes the idea of the Minoan civilization. Sir Arthur Evans proclaimed it, even though he didn't exactly understand what made it different than mainland Greece. In other words, he thought he had discovered a different world, but of course, you can understand, he didn't know exactly why, and that would be one of the great mysteries that would be discovered. Frankly, when one sees ruins, one needs a lot of education to appreciate them, and for the rest of us, sometimes it just seems like ruins. Many of us really need guidebooks or need someone with expertise to explain what it represents. But for those who've been there or have some knowledge of archaeology, you will be aware that his discovery there at Knossos and the remains of the palace at Knossos with all of its distinct characteristics and all of the artifacts that were discovered led scholars to realize that Evans had really come up with, if I may use the expression, pay dirt, that this was, in fact, something very special and unique. How unique? I don't think even he totally understood, simply because he is such a pioneer. Oh, I mean, there were others who had studied and thought about it before it. But it is he who puts it all together, providing us with a picture of what he called the Minoan civilization, starting here with the palace at Knossos. Now, speaking of palaces, you will see Knossos and you will see the little symbols of palaces here and there. Just noticing those, you could spend quite some time on Crete just visiting the ruins of those palaces. And you see the arrows going to other places. And that means long after Evans' time, modern archaeologists have discovered ruins. It just amazes me sometimes what they have been able to deduce, that these have Minoan connections. And so they figure that Minoan people went to these places and then built in the style of the Minoans. And you see over here in modern day Turkey, over here in Milton. So the work of archaeologists has continued a lot since Evans' time. He died in 1941. So obviously a lot more has been learned about what's called a palace culture, meaning these great places. And again, this will be familiar to some who have seen this, and it's very, very impressive when you see it, and artifacts such as the statue, which presumably was a Minoan goddess. And you say, well, why are her breasts overt, or why does she have the snakes? All kinds of interpretations are possible, but I'll assure you that it's got nothing to do with the Greek gods and goddesses. I didn't ever see this in Edith Hamilton, believe you me. No. Because I would definitely have had some questions. But But yeah, so yeah, that is a whole different situation, and an interesting one to think of the significance of this particular being. Again, this is the way it was supposed to be. And again, that's the kinds of things that people who know how to speculate, I guess you would say, on the finds of archaeologists can tell us how it must have been. And you think, well, gosh, everybody's working hard. Well, let's say somebody's working hard. I don't know if everybody is, but there are other people who are enjoying the palace, and so it is assumed that there was a large class of idlers who were practicing sloth while the rest worked. Not everyone was fulfilling the life's task of work, but a lot of people were to maintain this particular civilization. And it was a civilization in which, as we know from these kinds of drawings, they had a lot of recreation, albeit recreation that was somewhat dangerous. If you call flipping on bulls, which was coeducational and seemed to have been done without concerns about liability or other kinds of issues, would just they just go at it, and you say, but I've got a job next week. No, you don't. That's why you're part of the leisure class, so you can jump on bulls and things like that and just have fun, live today, leave a beautiful corpse. That's the sort of thing it's like. And again, not a lot of bull, but some, right, Frank? Yeah. So, sorry about that. In any event, bulls are very well known in the story of this culture, and whether or not this is, it's not Greek exclusively, and it's certainly not something that we associate with the Greeks necessarily. But the stories from this world do include tales of bulls, hither and yon. As far as the Minotaur was concerned, these stories of the Minotaur and other tales are told in Greek mythology without any reference to a separate Minoan civilization. I'm sure that when they put together all these Greek myths, they weren't concerned about giving credit to any people who weren't Greeks themselves. So, as far as anybody's concerned, it's all Greek. Thank you very much. But where does this story come from in Greek mythology? Well, again, I'm not sure this is one that I was ready for in the 4th grade, but let me tell you adults a little bit about it. I know. It's very strange, and very strange indeed, when a queen falls in love with a bull. And you say, I can see that this is a doomed relationship. Yes. Obviously, this was not natural. The poor dear had a curse put on her by the gods. It was just one of those things. And when gods get angry, they're a little impulsive, in their curses. And so said, you will fall in love with the bull. And so, of course, the queen comes in to the architect. He says, I can fix you up. I can have you ready for a date by tonight. Because, he specialized. He was an engineer. And so, so it was, you can imagine this was a serious problem, because if you want to date a bull, you got to look like a cow, right? I mean, that's, to develop the relationship beyond, So, love had its way, bull and cow, and she came in and she said, I think this is enough. One long weekend, and I'm back to humans. Yeah, this is just not going to work out. So she understood, and of course, 9 years later, she realized she had made a bad mistake. Yeah, half human, half bull. A very interesting pregnancy, I'm sure. Not to mention labor. Ooh. Anyway, the Minotaur, half bull, half man, arrived, and he had to be contained by his stepfather, I guess, and mother, and so he was contained in what is called the labyrinth, as we know, by the use of that word labyrinth, an adjective, labyrinthian circumstances, the mazes. So he had lots of time to work out and have activities of his own. Because remember, he's half human, so he's doing a lot of things. Must have had a little gym there, as we're going to see. And so he looked great, but he was half a bull. And he loved to eat humans. And so Minos, who controlled Athens as well as Crete, decreed that so many Athenian youth would annually be offered up, for special treats. And so the story here is more or less that Minos' daughter was Ariadne. Theseus is sent down to end the Minotaur, and you can say a lot of things, but basically he was quite the seducer, yes, and he was up to no good, and she led him into a place that he wasn't supposed to get into. But he said, it's that kind of thing like, come on, baby, let me see it. I really love you. You're so special. And oh God, yeah. So, it's an old story, folks. It's an old story. So, poor dear. So, anyway, there she falls for that, and in he goes. Now, did I tell you he works out? Look at that Minotaur. Doesn't he look great? I mean, yeah, a lot on the weights, everything. Yeah, really. Isn't that an amazing piece of sculpture, though? So, Theseus is ready to slay the Minotaur, and you're thinking, where does all of this go? Well, it goes into Greek mythology. But what relevance does it have? No one really knows. Probably going somewhere back in the legends of Crete. The bull standing for fertility, power, strength, and the rest we do not know. However, we do know that this civilization produced writing, and that is one of the most important aspects. Not that their frescoes and artwork and all the rest are not significant, because they are. And they tell us about their trading with Egyptians and Mesopotamians and many of the other peoples. But to have writing and writing that was discovered by Sir Arthur Evans and his team, was obviously a major discovery, and I think it went on during the 1890s. And these tablets, which had accidentally been burned into lasting, that's how they survived all that time. Not that anyone had saved them on purpose, but they had just been preserved incidentally. And these tablets are wonderful. Unfortunately, no one could read them. So it's like you have the tablet and say, oh, I wonder if this is a diary or this is some official history. You know, it always, when you have something like that, you wonder, you just think about the possibilities. In fact, it would be sometime before they could be read, and by that time, it will be discovered that they represent two different languages. They are called linear A and B to separate them, even though both use the same script. So that's why they're called linear, because they both use that script. Sir Arthur Evans did not know, it's not that he was not brilliant, it's just that he could not discover the secret behind what these languages were. And that will be left to our next hero. But before we leave Sir Arthur, it is not to say that by 1941 he had not made his mark. As far as, I think if you were in the archaeological world and you were getting a copy and he might be on the cover and, you know, doing appearances and that kind of thing, and superstar in archaeology. I mean, a few other things were going on in Britain in 1941, but I still, just a few, but I'm still thinking that if you had asked about archaeology, that name would be well known. Now, some of you know there were other archaeological projects going on, like the Sutton Hoo Anglo-Saxon discovery in 1938-39. But he was big, but I am sure that at the time of death, he was probably very frustrated at not being able to read linear A or linear B. However, one of the photographs my sister-in-law brought me is, in fact, it's sort of like Welcome to Sir Arthurville. When you get to the discovery at Knossos, there's an enormous statue of him, because I specifically asked for it so that people like me can venerate him and, you know, just get down before his statue. I mean, it's idolatry, yes, but he is so great. I mean, it's all, you can just feel his spirit around there in Crete. I mean, that's how strong his influence. And of course, you can imagine, after he was gone, other little nerdy archaeologists would try to criticize me. Oh, he wasn't all that big. I've got some great ideas too, you know, that kind of thing. But as long as he was breathing, he kept them quiet. They were kind of afraid of him because he was the man. He was the great archaeologist of Crete. And so it just fascinates me how much influence he had. However, that must have been very frustrating not to be able to read them. As I say, the fires preserved some tablets. And you know, that's always happenstance. What if somebody can read it? What difference will it make? Well, that's the big question that we turn to now. Here he is. When he was a schoolboy, Michael Ventris actually heard Sir Arthur Evans speak. I think it was 1938, and it may have been on BBC radio. But we're all very impressionable when we're young, and I think this guy being so brilliant, he went on to become an architect and just doing this sort of thing as a hobby. During the war, he specialized in German codes, breaking German codes. So he was a man of many, many gifts. But I think the speech, at least that's what people said about him, Michael Ventris was so awed by Sir Arthur Evans and his discoveries that I guess he thought, once I do what I need to do to be educated and to deal with this German matter, I want to do something about the languages of the tablets on Crete. And that's what they say. It's an absolutely amazing phenomenon, and you see the book cover itself. He is the individual responsible, and I guess you'd say early 50s, for revealing the meaning of linear B. And it is an unbelievable accomplishment that someone could do that. He couldn't read linear A, mind you. But he determined that linear B is an ancient form of Greek using a linear script as opposed to the Greek that we know from modern, well, classical times. Because remember, at the time of this Minoan civilization, Plato is what, 1,000 or so years away? So it's another world. It is another world that Michael Ventris was concerned with here. And it's far beyond the knowledge of most of us to imagine learning how he went about this. But obviously he was a man who knew a lot about languages, ancient and modern. And he was very young. He died in an automobile accident in 1956. So he had discovered, and remember, he was also working on his career as an architect at the time. So he is quite an interesting person, and I think a very important one in the field of archaeology, and certainly mourned by those who wanted to know more. Well, I know you're waiting to find out, what did those tablets say? Well, those linear B tablets were essentially supply lists. Yeah, bummer, huh? You want, dear diary, I met a really great bull last night. You know, that kind of thing. But, hey, sorry, no such luck. No bulls, just all kind of supplies. And you think, well, that's interesting for the history of inventory. But, but you can imagine historians would love to have had a different kind of item collection or assortment of historical records. Nevertheless, it is an amazing accomplishment and a very important one in many respects. When I saw this obituary back in 1998, and you know, oh boy, I hit those New York Times obituaries. I can't wait, you know. Always think you never know who might be there. You know, it's the who's who of dead people, isn't it? I mean, it's, if you get a New York Times obituary, it's not just like, I mean, I love our paper, don't get me wrong. It's just, but You've hit the big time when you get a write-up here. And did he ever? We got a nice write-up. This is a very modest individual and a very important one named Chadwick. John Chadwick. And I say very modest because he was the partner, best friend, colleague, whatever, of Michael Ventris. And think about that, 1956 to 1998, and he worked to the end, basically trying to carry on the work of Michael Ventris, and always saying, well, if he had lived, we would know what this meant. You know, very modest, like I'm just trying to do a few little things. I am just not worthy to walk in his shoes and all of that. And he was a genuinely fine man. But he said before his death that he did not believe that anyone would ever find the meaning of linear A and the language, which is sad in a way. We know it's obviously not Greek, but then they knew that when Ventris came out with his works. So, what is to be assumed? Well, it's the language of a different civilization, but it must have been a non-Greek civilization, and then the Greeks came in. And how did they come in? Well, here is what we figure. Knossos, which is the largest city on the island of Crete, we found both linear A and linear B tablets. At other locations on Crete, they have found linear A tablets. Linear B tablets have been found both in Knossos and in places in mainland Greece, indicating to many that the Greeks took over Knossos. Now, if you have had the opportunity and availed yourself of reading the relevant parts in the book, it's an interesting argument that they will make here, that some people have argued, as they always do, that various things occurred that brought the Greeks to Crete. That these people, you want to call them Minoans, you want to call them people of Crete, whatever, and then they were destroyed mysteriously or taken over. And what might have happened? Well, your book spends a lot of time trying to overcome theories of natural disaster, because they were always popular over the years, the natural disaster theories. There was some volcanoes or whatever, and then there's nothing. Instead, what seems to be hitting the archaeological circles is that it was invasions. The Greeks that we're about to meet, called Mycenaeans, came onto the island and essentially took control of it. And so, the first thing they do is institute mandatory year of Greek 101, that kind of thing. So everybody's going to go Greek. That's what you do. And they say, well, what about linear A? Whatever that was. And everybody's like, nah, we don't need that anymore. We're Greeks and you're not. So it's like somehow this element took over and we say goodbye to an independent Minoan civilization. It is interesting, though, if you think that was the first civilization, pre-Greek, and really undiscovered prior to modern times. Because the Greeks themselves, as in Pericles and Oedipus and Plato and the gang, all assumed this was part of their own early history. They really did. No one seems to have had this. So that is why you can say that Sir Arthur is truly the discoverer of this world, this Minoan world, but definitely well worth a trip. Now, speaking of famous people of modern times in connection with the ancient world, let's always bring up the name of Heinrich Schliemann, because Schliemann, excuse me, thank you, and you should know, yes, thank you, Schliemann. He is one of the most, what shall I call him? If Sir Arthur Evans was a hero, a virtuous man, Schliemann was something of, questionable, not to say anything bad, but there were issues, shall we say, about his work. But the subject of the Trojan War would never be complete without the name of Heinrich Schliemann. That is for sure. And because the Trojan War plays such a major role, I mean, think, if you will, of the various themes of Greek tragedy and Greek writing, and you think of how often the stories of the Trojan War figure into it. Even Aristotle, the great philosopher, would cite and quote from the Iliad and the Odyssey as if he were Jewish or Muslim or Christian in citing Scripture. These were the works in terms of being the foundation of that civilization. When we see the map and we see where Troy was supposed to be, or Hisarlik, in modern-day Turkey, we're talking about a place that I'm not altogether sure that would currently be somewhere that one would want to go. I don't know. It might be. I don't want to discourage anyone who is setting off on a Turkish trip, but maybe for now we'd just like to look at it on the map and think about nice trips for the future. Get somebody to send you a t-shirt or something like that from the gift shop. Because believe me, you know there's one available in your size, so in your color choices, because there are tourists everywhere I've ever been. So you know that somewhat with that significant that the Turks, who have ruled over this area for many centuries, now appreciate, since the 19th century, the value of what they have. There's Knossos, and you don't forget that, and remember the journey of the Greeks to Troy. It is absolutely amazing, if you ever want to read the Iliad and the Odyssey, or you haven't done it since college, the enormous number of different translations there are and different ways to approach it. Or like some of my students use those cliff notes. I know, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have even brought that up. But that ugliness is allowed because of, I think, constitutional rights. But yes, wherever I see those yellow things, I try to intervene as a morality police, say, how dare you? But in fact, we know that in this particular translation, Richard Lattimore was a big one some years ago. But whichever one is used or written about, we know that the Iliad and the Odyssey are the standard works as far as the Western epic style. Now, those of you taught or teach English literature and courses, and you might say, well, I prefer Virgil for my classes. But we won't debate that, but we will note that the Greeks came before the Romans, and the Homeric works were very important for Virgil, so I rest my case. The Homeric works do have an enormous significance in classical literature. And they certainly did in my day, in medieval period. They were citing in medieval works, they were often citing characters from the Iliad and the Odyssey. In 12th and 13th century works, utilizing figures that many of us grow to love as children, like Andromache and Hector and all the rest. In other words, they are standard. And this is to say that no one ever did too much thinking prior to archaeology of, was there really a Trojan War? Yeah, archaeology brings always that note of skepticism because nobody'd ever been there. It's as if to say, well, Troy was this great place, but not sure exactly where it was, somewhere over east, somewhere over there, and I bet it was a real nice place, that kind of thing. And, and that's weird, isn't it? You just think, as much as they talked about it, nobody'd ever been there. And then the skeptics of archaeology primarily say, we will find it. And among these people will be the great German archaeologist who will say, I will demonstrate where this place is. Now, in the 19th century, in what today we call Turkey, was, of course, the Ottoman Empire. For those who thinking about the Great War and remembering the breakup of the Ottoman Empire and all the rest will be aware that this period, as the Russian Tsar would call it, the Ottoman Empire was the sick man of Europe, and it was losing its parts as Slavic and other peoples were gradually pulling out of the arrangement. The Greeks had established an independent state earlier in the 19th century, and the others were waiting for their turn, so to speak. All of this is to say that the Ottoman Empire was having a hard time holding on, but the German imperial government, who was a new kid on the block, they said, we like you Turks. How would you all like some financial assistance? Maybe a bond, just between friends? That kind of thing. So the Germans were probably trying to help out the Turks, to irk the Russians and maybe the French. All of this international politics in the late 19th and early 20th century need not detain us here, except to make us aware there's a lot of intrigue going on with this Trojan War business. And now let's get down to the story of the Iliad. How did it all start? And you say, well, it's a beauty contest. Yes, it is. And you think, is this really a good thing for a 9-year-old? No, it isn't. Yeah. I don't think this is the version I saw. Yeah, I think back in that day. I think back then they were dressed, but this is artwork that was done with the goddesses, as you know, Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, seeking to influence the Trojan prince Paris for that decision to the fairest of them all. And the way it started out, and of course the artwork, and you see little arrows hanging on to Mama. That's cute, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, that's what I figure. That he said, "Oh, you're a winner, Mother. You're a winner. You're so pretty. Just cover yourself, please, Mother." So yeah, I mean they are right. But yeah, everybody really is attractive. Yeah, nobody, everybody looks good. You'll give them that. And you say, "Oh, music, it works." Oh, musicians are. See, and you say, "Well, who is that?" Oh, well, that's Paris. He'd come to visit the most beautiful woman, Helen, a married lady, queen. Paris, Prince of Troy. He had been promised the most beautiful woman in the world if he gave the prize to Aphrodite, and he did. So she said, "Okay, and for your prize, you'll get a woman." Unfortunately, she's already married. But you don't mind being an adulterer, do you? He said, "Oh, no, I'm not. I'm not prejudiced." So then, yeah, and she said, "As long as I'm visiting, I would like to have a recital." And so you see the result. Oh, yeah, seduction. And so after he performed, then they had this sordid affair. And her husband, Menelaus, was, how you say, irritated. I don't think heartsick is the term. I think this is what you call masculine pride. You know, like that. She was mine, and you couldn't have her, and so I really resent this. All of this for the Trojan War, right? And lots of good artwork. But the idea being that the story of the two heroes, Hector and Achilles, have fascinated us ever since because of their magnetism, their sad characteristics, their inevitable ends, and all the rest. All of this is, of course, just a mere backdrop. So, here we have, of course, as you'll remember, Achilles and Hector, and the end of it. And here you have Odysseus with Circe. For those who don't remember, she was, in fact, an enchantress. I always love that. I've never known an enchantress, but I always wanted to meet one. But it's that idea, and they just don't come around all the time. But apparently, she was irresistible. And you see the poor guy, he said, "Look, I've got some more adventures. I've got a lot of things I need to do. This has been real. Let's get together again. I love your name. This is a very attractive island." And you see the pitiful thing. She's real upset because it's bad to be deserted. So, but off he goes with more adventures in Homer's Odyssey. And as such, it is a very great story. Both are. And now, what do we care? Well, we care because of archaeology and because of discovering Troy. Now, I thought I'd show this map just so you could see where we are in terms of Greeks and Turks in the 19th century. As many will know, Greeks and Turks have had their problems over the years. It's not a warm friendship. In fact, it's not a friendship at all. But they're there, and I guess they're going to stay. And in this particular area, which you see in the red box, there was an assumption that the location of Troy obviously had to be somewhere in that area of what had once been Greek. Because remember, over time, lots of those areas that had been Greek had become Turkish. Populations, ethnic Greeks had moved out, gone west into mainland Greece, I suppose, and cut down the Greek population in what would become post-World War I Turkey proper. Because remember, this was still the Ottoman Empire. All of this, the backdrop for him. Yeah, there he is. I'm going to say it right this time. Schliemann. Schliemann. I'll get it right. I promise. I work on this week. Schliemann. Schliemann's life is fascinating, and believe me, he was a legend in his own mind. He was, yeah. I always think people who have the nerve to write their own autobiographies and say, all the questions you probably wanted answered, and I've got them here for you, that sort of thing. So Schliemann was, well, he was a fascinating guy. He was supposedly I say supposedly because many of the things he wrote in his autobiography were questionable. But he said that he was the son of a devout but classically oriented Lutheran pastor, which is a good thing to do in Germany of his day, I suppose. But his father was devoted to Scripture and homiletics and all the things that one does as a pastor. But he loved his Homeric works, so much so that on his deathbed he said to young Heinrich, "Would you please discover where Troy is? I leave this great challenge to you because I've been so devoted to the ministry," guilt trip, that I didn't have time to do this. Now again, whether that's true or whether the stories that his father was an abusive alcoholic, there's another version. There's some version, and I tried to tell the good first. You saw that, yeah. I tried to say something nice. But take nothing away from the fact he was a very bright man, and he worked very hard, and by the time he was in his 40s, he had already made a fortune, both in America and in Russia. Yeah, for example, the California Gold Rush and all such activities like that. He was a very, very bright man. But all of it was for a purpose. He wasn't just a workaholic. He had a purpose, and that purpose, of course, was to find Troy. I mean, that's what we call obsession or determination, or if you have another word for it. But he definitely wanted to do this and was determined that he would accomplish it. Now, you see the life, 1822 to 1890, so we've got to get right on it, particularly if we got to make that money with the California Gold Rush, 1848, 49, and moving on and getting money. He was married to a Russian woman, and then he decided enough of this chasing after money. I need something else. So he got himself out of a loveless marriage, sold out his various business interests, and decided he would devote the rest of his life to Troy. But before he can do that, he needs a helpmate. Yes, he needs another love. And how do you find that? You find it in the personal section of the Athens newspaper. Wanted, strong Greek woman. Yeah, exactly. Wanted, somebody who loves Homeric epics. You know, so I know, isn't that romantic? And we can just talk about the Iliad and the Odyssey and just have fun all the time. And so he began, believe it or not, he had so much money and people knew about him. Families started setting up interviews for their daughters. Yes, said, good catch, good catch. You can get him. I mean, he's a little oldish, but he's still a find. So people began to get interviews, and somebody did really well, got top score in a lot of different categories, you know. And so basically, she became the next Frau Schliemann. Schliemann. I tell you, I've got a week of therapy and I'll be back. So the Schliemann, the idea then was that he will marry Sophia and she will prove everything that he had hoped for. She provided 2 children who were named... Yeah. Oh, you caught me. You caught me. She will provide 2 children, one who was named Andromache, and one named Hector, and they will be baptized. He allowed baptism as long as they had little copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey on their head. So they were little Homer babies. So yeah, that when you get to that level of emotion, you may have questions. But they were happy, just the 4 of them. But they were not just going to sit around in Berlin or Athens. They were out for work because he was sure that he knew where it was going to be. And as it turned out, he was right. There she is, and much younger, mother of 2 children. And after he died, she and their children continued the legend of Heinrich and Mr. Troy, you know, that kind of thing, because, of course, this would be very, very important. Can you imagine all the archaeological magazines? Because you see, he wasn't a member of the club. You see, he didn't have a PhD. And so it's like amateur, regular person. I mean, it's really hurtful if you're not in that kind of club of scholars. And I imagine he did have a lot of laughs at their expense. Well, losers, who's Mr. Troy? I mean, here for Troy. Is it you? I think not. It's me. It's me. Amateur, you know, that kind of thing. So he had a big deal of it. Don't invite me to your seminar. Who cares, you know? It's just amazing what an interesting life he had. And it's a good thing he had money. Don't forget that. It's good to have money. Okay, in case you doubt it, it's not like he was going to some government. I mean, even the German imperial government, I'm not sure they would have been willing to fund all of this. I mean, it's a nice idea, Ashlayman, but we don't know. I'm sorry, I know. So off they went for the digs, and he got to make lots of cash withdrawals from the Berlin Bank, I can assure you, because the Turks were expensive. You have to pay Turkish laborers, Turkish workers, and at the same time, of course, you have to there are people to be bribed. There are all kinds of expenses involved in this project. But he had the site of something called Hisarlik. It was over there on the coast of western Turkey, still is. And there the digs took place over time, and it turned out he was right. Or so he said. Yeah, you know, it seemed that when he did come out with this, there was a large amount of agreement that this was a site of a city or cities, as you can see, which is phenomenal to me. But I'm not an archaeologist. But the idea that city was built on top of city. And so you can see Homer's is called level 6. And the idea being over, I guess, these millennia, that as one level fades, that it's just easy for settlers of the future simply to build on top of it. Presumably some must sink, I don't know. Whatever the case, this location, he would claim, was his Troy. This is the Troy Daddy and I have been dreaming about for a long, long time. And I think he's what we would call in our world a media hound. He sought it and he got it. You know, London, New York, Athens, Constantinople, all the big hot spots of people who would be interested in this kind of venture. Now, this is before, you know, the discovery of King Tut. That didn't come till 1922. But this is along the same kinds of lines, if you want to understand the significance. And, of course, he's looking for the bottom dollar, how much money I'm going to get out of this. So that's, of course, a factor. But it's also a very, very interesting that the Bronze Age, as early as the Bronze Age, even before the Minoans, in other words, this first urban location must have gone even back earlier than that, according to the theory. And that would be the lowest. Now, what had happened, you can see level 9, a Roman community had been the last in that area. And I guess when the ordinary person came there, that's what you would see, the rest of an old Roman town. But it was his certainty that this must have been the site of Troy that led him to spend all that money and determined that it was Troy. And he was a believer. You know, all the communities of archaeologists could say, well, it's interesting work, but, you know, you're probably off a bit, old chap. You know, that kind of thing. A bit of British, you know, the whole putting him down, I would say. But he was sure he was right. Now, when you go, sometimes you be like my students were every year when we got to Stonehenge. And I would always say, where can we get Cokes and some refreshment? I'd say, look at it, stay right here, do not move. I was furious because they wanted, oh, it's a bunch of old rocks, you know. Like, that hurt my feelings. I don't mean to be sensitive, but it was just that I just thought they could be a little more appreciative. And it's somehow, when you walk around Troy, you might not get that thrill of, oh, Hector, oh, Andromache, I feel your presence. Any of that. Some of us don't get as excited as others. But it is an interesting sight. So if you're ever over in Western Turkey, be sure and take a look, stop by, and see this. And just imagine Schliemann and the great German archaeologist, coward, and Sophia. Yeah, I know. I can't win with the too many. But when you see this, it is truly amazing to think how he had devised these ideas at great expense. And believe me, the Turks benefited quite a bit. Among the great treasures were these fascinating items, which he named after King Priam of Troy. I thought that was nice. He didn't name them after himself. He named them at least after the king of Troy. And he said, well, what's the significance of the king of Troy? Not much, because we don't know there ever was one. It's just a figure in Homer, right? I mean, but he treats him like a real person. So he called all these treasures that he found, and they were on Sophia in the photograph you saw before, in case you wondered. Now, the interesting story, and I bet you already know this, is that these treasures were shipped off to Berlin. That was a no-no. I think they gave the Turkish workers the day off. They said, oh, this is Sophia's birthday. Y'all just enjoy. I know. And then, you know, rushing in Federal Express or something like that. And then off it goes by special courier to the emperor. Saying, look what I did. I love Germany. And it stayed there until, I guess, April or May of 1945, when it was shipped to, Moscow. Interesting. Wonder how it got over there. But it, as far as I'm aware, it's still there as I speak today. I think we thought by the end of the Cold War, all that would be straightened out. And maybe even Athens would be qualified for some of it, or even the Turks, but no such luck. As far as I'm aware, the Russians still have this treasury of Priam. But that's an interesting little story from the 20th century and this great treasure. Now again, if Troy was Troy, and not everyone accepts that, it has many problems. And among the problems is the treasury of Priam and all of the city from which it was a part were centuries off the time period that there could have been a Trojan War. So either the city that he admired so much, the great archaeologist, Mr. S, I'll call him. Oh, see, I'm self-security. So he basically was off with his days because the city he identified as Troy could not have been at that particular time period. It was long centuries before. That is the problem. The city that would work, level 7, was not a glory. It was okay, but not in any sense the glorious city that Homer describes. So somebody's off. And there the mystery remains. But we do know, whatever the truth of the Trojan War, that there was, and without any doubt, cities of sorts, polis is the name, that existed in this pre-classical Greece. They are the bearers of linear B, remember? And they are called Mycenaean. Mycenaean. And you can see some of them here because the Greeks were definitely urban builders. These Mycenaeans, Indo-European peoples, had come into this area, presumably during the Bronze Age, settled in these various places, and then established themselves into what became pre-classical Greece. And my time is gone. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to see you again next week. I'll get it right, I promise. I've got a problem. I just need help. Speech. That was hilarious.
I knew that I was going to miss out on the family trees, you know. So I found the timeline of Greece.
Oh, you did?
Which is wonderful.
Isn't that amazing?
That's what I was just telling you. I.E. the last vowel.
Hey, doing well, how are you?